Yeah. All right. So climate change has become a prominent issue in recent times due to the fact that the Earth's temperature has been increasing steadily, and as a result, many scientists have conducted research and studies in order to indicate how and why. Today, I'm here to tell you the primary reason for this, and that is me, you, and humankind in general. Humans have generated an immense amount of CO2 as a result of the industrial era. In addition to this, the way we handle our food sources, agriculture, livestock, has released immense amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And lastly, population growth and how the pressure on the amount of fossil fuels that is needed to meet the demands of such high population has resulted in temperature warming. So first of all, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we have seen a positive correlation between the amount of CO2 gas and the amount of the rise in temperatures on the Earth. According to NASA, carbon dioxide, a minor but very important component of the atmosphere, is released through natural processes such as respiration and volcanic eruptions. However, humans has added to this through deforestation, land use changes, and the burning of fossil fuels. Humans have increased atmospheric CO2 concentration by more than 1/3 since the Industrial Revolution began. This is the most important logarithm forcing of climate change. So it's NASA saying that humans, their needs, such as our clothes, our computers, our laptops, our phones, all this requires the burning of fossil fuels. We and our needs are the causes of the excess carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, which as a result causes the Earth to warm. The European Commission adds on to this by stating how, pointing out the deforestation. Trees help to regulate the climate by absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere, so when they are cut down, this lessens the benefit of the trees and how they absorb the carbon dioxide and turn it into oxygen. So when you're cutting down trees, you're increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and decreasing the amount of carbon dioxide that is removed from the atmosphere. So in addition to this, the agricultural aspect that affects the warming of the Earth is how livestock, it creates waste. This waste expels methane into the atmosphere. We humans need food. The more humans there is, the more food that we're going to need. So the more livestock, the more methane that's going to be in the atmosphere. In addition to this, our agriculture, our fruits and vegetables, fertilizers contain nitrogen, and when we use these fertilizers to increase the yields, in order to meet the demands of the population, we increase the amount of nitrogen in the atmosphere. So with that adds on to the increasing effect of the greenhouse effect. Well, the greenhouse effect, what it is when we have an excess amount of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, nitrogen, methane. This creates a blanket that doesn't allow these gases to escape into space, and with that we have the warming of the planet. Moving on, population growth. According to research done by the World Bank, a positive association between population growth and emission is confirmed. A 1% increase in population raised the CO2 emissions by 1.28%. So why does this happen? Well, the more people, the more resources, and the more energy that it requires to meet the demands of these people. So they state that each person in a population makes some demand on the energy for the essentials of life: food, water, clothing, shelter, and so on. So as long as there's more people, there's an increase in people, there's going to be a raise in the amount of energy that's needed to meet these demands. They give us statistics in the impact of this. The impact of population pressure on emissions has been more pronounced in developing countries than developed countries. It is estimated that global emissions will reach as high as 13.72 gigatons by 2025, and the magnitude for that more than doubles the emission level of 1990, and half of the gains will be attributed to the future population growth. So here we see that there's going to be a drastic increase in the amount of global greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere. This is only going to be increasing as long as the population is increasing, which is it's probable that it's going to continue to be increasing. And with that, there's going to be drastic effects. These effects include With our burning of coal and oil, we have heated the deep oceans, we have reversed the carbon cycle by more than 400 years, we have loosened the wave of violent and chaotic weather, we have altered the timing of the seasons, we are living on increasable precarious margin of stability, as Ross Gelston puts it, an environmentalist. So it's clear that human activity, there's a direct correlation between what humans do and the way the temperature and the rising temperatures of the planet. So in essence, the Earth's temperature, by stated by Ross Gelston, the Earth's average temperature could rise by as much as 10.4 degrees over the next 100 years, the most rapid change in the 10 millennia, and more than 6% higher than the same group predicted less than 6 years ago.
All right, well, there is a proposition, and you kind of introduce it in an interesting way, which I enjoyed, but I do want to make sure that you identify the proposition in a clear, explicit way also. So don't forget to have that declarative sentence at the beginning and not just rely on kind of your clever, not quite a joke, but a way of presenting it. There's a reasonable preview of what the supporting points would be. Again, that's a little subtle. There's no numerical signpost for them at the beginning of the speech, but I was listening, and I kind of made the inference that those were the points that you were going to be talking about. As it turns out, I was right, and so that was easy to follow for me. But remember, you sometimes have to help the casual listener make a little bit more effort. The controversy issue is, I think, what's a little bit problematic here at the beginning of the speech, because I'm not sure that anybody is disputing that humans contribute to the growth of CO2 in the atmosphere. The controversy is whether or not that growth is substantial enough to produce some harm, whether it's mitigated by anything else that human beings do. It's a little hard to say that we don't put CO2 in the atmosphere since we breathe, and since we consume goods, like you said, there's not really much doubt that more people means that there's going to be more CO2. But does the natural system not compensate for that adequately? And that's where I think there might be a little bit more controversy on this particular subject. But you barely mentioned those kinds of issues. You did talk about deforestation, but that was primarily presupposition. There's not any explanation about whether or not deforestation is widely continuing, whether or not we have fewer plants, trees, all those sorts of things than we had at one time. I think a little bit of information like that would be really helpful. The waste issue is also explained. That's primarily the agricultural point on the second point that you're talking about. And again, I don't think there's any doubt that animals, humans, everybody is expelling a variety of waste. The number of animals and the amount of waste that they're expelling that then creates CO2 in the atmosphere could be quantified a little bit more effectively, but you did have some, like I said, you had one piece of information when you were talking about population growth that talked about the relationship of population growth to increase in CO2 in the atmosphere, which is fine. The tipping point that gets referred to is never really documented. I think you need to provide that. The one person that you quote at the end seems to be an authority on all the horrible things that are going to happen in the world, but it's like very generic information. It's sort of like Chicken Little screaming, everything bad is going to happen. But what's the reason to believe that that's the case? I think that that's a little problematic. And that, I think, is where the argument is. So I think you need to devote maybe all the time that you talked about the sources of CO2, condense that into one section of the speech, and then talk about what the consequence of that CO2 is going to be and how likely that consequence is going to occur. I think there would be a little bit more argument there. You have a tendency to do a lot of reading, and sometimes it doesn't sound like you're differentiating one argument from another, so it runs together a little bit. Okay, thank you.